has really accelerated digital transformation, right? So there's a lot more organizations on the cloud, accelerated into the cloud, accelerated fintech, right? It is really a cloud-first world, and network security is really about how are we going to secure the cloud adequately. We hear of so many cloud breaches out there, misconfigured Amazon Web Services cloud buckets or any other type of cloud buckets you have there. And even cloud storage has been encrypted by ransomware, and data has been leaked. APIs or application programming interfaces have been breached as well. So how do we level up our cybersecurity to keep pace with this digital transformation? So today we have our two esteemed panelists who will share their thought leadership and experience with us. Do ready your questions for them as we move along, right? So let me first introduce our panel of speakers. First and foremost, on my left, we have David Fairman, who's the CSO for Netskope. So David Fairman is an experienced CSO, strategic advisor, investor, and coach. He is currently the Apex CISO for Netskope. Prior to that, David was the CSO for NAB and the Group Chief Information Security CISO for the Royal Bank of Canada. So David has been a senior leader at JP Chase, JPMC as Deputy Technology Controls Officer and Global Head of Technology Risk and Control. David also held several senior roles at Royal Bank of Scotland, America's Head of Information Security, EMEA, and so forth. So in 2015, David was named as one of the top 10 CISOs to know, co-authored Cyber Risk book, and co-edited the paper Fintech Growth and Deregulation, published by Risk Books. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, on his left, we have Jaiveer Singh, Manager for Enterprise IT Infrastructure and ITSM Platform at Singlife. So Jaiveer has over 25 years of experience in the technology innovation and product management. He is also advisor for fintech startups and has a strong interest in fintech, financial inclusion, digital transformation, AI, blockchain, and cloud technology, all emerging tech, right? He has worked for Deutsche Bank, DBS, MUFG banks in the past and currently engaged with Singlife, with Aviva, right? Thank you for joining us.
Thanks,
Jaiveer.
Thank you for being here.
So let me first start the ball rolling by throwing the first question at you, Jaiveer. Jaiveer, how far along is Singlife in your digitalization cloud migration journey?
Sure, Stephen. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So for people probably not familiar with Singlife or Singlife with Aviva, as the brand name is, right? So 2020, Aviva Singapore, which is a subsidiary of Aviva London, got merged with a fintech company in insurance sector called Singlife. Singlife is around 4 to 5 years startup company, very successful in their product domain, and investors of basically Singlife and Aviva Singapore business merged together 2020. And yeah, so that's what we refer as now Singlife with Aviva. Yeah. Well, you can see these two companies, right? So one is basically Singlife is a cloud native company, nothing in data center. Yeah. On the other side, we have Aviva Singapore, 20, 30 years old company in this market, and they pretty much have everything in data center here in this region. So Aviva Singapore has been a regional headquarter in Asia, which means we run multiple countries out of Singapore, right? Right from Middle East, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Australia, number of companies we provide IT services from there. So now with the merger, we basically bring this best of the world of both sides and come out with the cloud migration program. So yes, so in terms of this merger thing, which started acting on the last year, we have done a lot of work to bring systems from both the companies to common platform to give seamless experience to our customers. Now, obviously, we have started as part of this initiative. We also started a review of our infrastructure, what we can move and by when to cloud. So we do have, in terms of roadmap, that we would like to move everything from our data centers to cloud. When we say cloud or shutting down data center, does not mean we are going to pick up the same application as it is and move it to the cloud, right? That's not the objective, obviously. So in this assessment, which we are now running from last few months, figuring out what is the right solution, whether it's a SaaS product, it's a platform as a service, and which particular solution do not have alternative, which we have to basically host in cloud, build either from scratch or certain components, right? So obviously, the architecture of existing application stack is going to be very different when you see it in the cloud, right? So this program, we are just, I would say, assessment stage at this point in time. Okay. We have looked into various options where we can house all our legacy infrastructure, including our AS400 and kind of platforms, which is not supported by default by cloud platforms, right? So we are looking into all those options, but at this point in time, we are still in assessment stage.
Okay, it looks like you have a lot of cloud initiatives going on. How concerned are you with data and API breaches that you see in the news?
Yeah, so in terms of our data and APIs, so as you can see now, two companies, which means both these companies have their own setup of data and APIs, right? So on Aviva side, different kind of API and data systems were present. Singlife side different. Now we are obviously converging them into one single platform, and as part of this initiative in terms of data, we are bringing them to Snowflake on AWS, right? So basically, we got a unified data lake, which is hosted on Snowflake platform. And in terms of our API, again, there were two solutions. Now we're combining to a MuleSoft API infrastructure, right? So yeah, so both of these components now coming into one shape, yeah.
All right. So with data lake, definitely there will be more concentration risk because you are putting all the data into one single platform, right? So David, coming to you, do you see a similar trend of increased concern with potential data breaches and API breaches in the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. So you think about digital transformation and what that's really led to from a technical implementation perspective. We're seeing everyone's heard of the API economy, right? Really, when we're talking about cloud architectures, cloud services, we're talking about APIs and microservices being exposed, enabling applications or end users to be able to manipulate data within those applications through those microservices or APIs. And obviously, the APIs allow interconnections between cloud services and cloud systems. I think there was, last year or the year before, it was Gartner that predicted that APIs, actually authenticated APIs, not just APIs, authenticated APIs will be the most targeted attack vector, which is natural, right? Because that is, that mechanism for communicating, sharing data, and collaborating with data between third parties, between entities, and between services, obviously is being facilitated by APIs. So that's going to be the largest attack surface, if you like. So yes, we're seeing a massive rise in attacks of APIs. And I think the subtle point I want to make is specifically around authenticated APIs, because quite often what happens is if an API has been authenticated, there's an element of trust given to that API. But recognise that the request that can be sent through and what gets sent back and how that API is manipulated is still something that needs to be validated and assured. And I guess that lends into the zero trust principles that everyone's talking about these days, is verification and validation of that entity and ensuring the principle of least privilege. And not just because somebody's authenticated or a service or an API is authenticated, you still want to validate exactly the behaviour or the actions that API or that service is actually conducting.
All right. You spoke about the APIs. These are the keys to the kingdom, right?
Yes.
Yeah, when they are authenticated, and you mentioned about zero trust. So how prevalent do you see SASE being deployed? I know SASE sounds like a very sexy acronym, right? Yeah. So secure access, secure edge. Quite a fair number of vendors have been speaking about that, talking about that. Yep. So how prevalent have you seen SASE in being adopted to implement zero trust principles in the cloud and be able to protect against API and data breaches?
Yeah, it's a good point. So SASE, I just want to be clear on some terminology and how I think about things and how Netskope thinks about things. So SASE is an architectural framework. There's certain products and tools that implement that architectural framework. So for Netskope, we call it, actually Gartner released a magic contract called SSE, the Security Service Edge. So if you think of SASE being the convergence of network and security capabilities coming together, because the network doesn't exist anymore, right? The network is now the internet, really, particularly when we start talking about that migration to cloud environments. So if we're moving out into this public environment that we've never trusted before, security has to move with that. So I think about SASE as an architectural framework which allows us to move the controls that we've normally had internally to protect our data and to protect our environment. We need to take those controls and move them to where the users are, closer to the users and closer to the data. Hence SASE. It's taking those controls that we traditionally used to know and love. We're now moving that, migrating that to the cloud, just like our services and our data is migrating to the cloud. Those controls need to go with them. Security Service Edge is the technology that underpins and implements the security aspect of SASE, because SASE is a network aspect as well as a security aspect. In terms of zero trust, for me, I want to be clear about what I mean by zero trust. Zero trust for me is a continual evaluation of various data signals or data points throughout the entity of a session to give the organisation a level of confidence in the validity of that transaction. When I say validity of that transaction, is it the right end user? Is that user behaving appropriately? Are they accessing the right type of data? Have we enforced the principle of least privilege? Do we trust the endpoint that request is coming from? All those different data points, and that allows us to make a risk decision based on, and therefore based on what we want to do with that service or with that transaction, with that session. We may choose to remove access, terminate session, drive step-up authentication, etc. With a SASE solution, and SSE specifically, it enables you to integrate a lot of these data points. So we should be, and I suggest that the minimum data points you want to be looking at is identity, user behavior, threat, data, endpoint. They're the minimum data points that you really want to take a look at and make a risk decision around that. So for me, SASE, SSE are a foundational component on how you start that zero trust journey.
Thanks, David. So trust but verify, and with all these data points,
continually evaluate.
Continually verify and validate.
And adaptively, adapt access appropriately. Absolutely.
Right. Thanks. So coming to you, Jaiveer, I understand that you are adopting a cloud migration journey. So what is your thoughts about SASE and your journey in deploying SASE in your environment?
Sure, Stephen. So maybe before I talk about SASE, maybe I'll paint a scenario, why this thing is required and how does it help, right? So before, obviously COVID started, maybe very few organizations will talk about SASE. Architecture-wise is there with a different component. Now the theme has changed in the last 2-3 years. So as an organization, you are providing IT services to your users now. The users could be in this country or in anywhere across the globe, right? Your IT services can be anywhere across the globe. Not necessarily that your IT service is running out of a data center, AWS and Azure. It could be hosted out of an Oracle Cloud data center sitting in Europe and US, right? So your IT service is somewhere, your users is somewhere, and your business is constantly adding new location as they want the aspiration to grow the business from one country to the regional markets, right? So essentially, which means you need to have some sort of solution where you can give them this agility to connect any new location with all required security in place as fast as you can. Obviously we have tool in the past also, right, to achieve these objectives. Now with SASE, the things have become simpler, right? It has given us agility and speed. That one network and security component coming together, which means now it's a matter of, I would say, days, we can add new location. Network connectivity is there, right? So I have to add new offices in multiple location in Singapore or outside Singapore, how I can do. Because WAN is an integral component of SASE itself. The security come inbuilt, all the security components are there. So you have to just configure those things, and depending upon what service you are consuming, right? What IT services you are going to open up, everything end to end can be, secured or supervised through your SASE platform. So one example probably I can give is a few initiatives which we have been doing where this has been useful, and we have also onward started this journey recently. So obviously when the COVID started, we first challenged, like many other companies, we faced how people are not allowed to come to office. So what do? So you immediately build a solution to provide them virtual desktop so that they can operate their IT services wherever they are, whenever they want. Right? So we did that. We built a very quick solution in a few months' time and rolled out to thousands of users who can log into those virtual desktops. Now, with all those services and the SaaS services, right? And now another scenario in our case, the integration of two companies, right? Scenario a little bit more complex as our user base grows. Now, all of these things which we are doing, right? So we built our virtual desktop in Azure Cloud. And now we started on the SASE journey where we are bringing Azure Desktop all the network. So basically, users sitting somewhere, accessing a virtual desktop in Azure Cloud. The network traffic is basically passing through our SASE solution, which is Palo Alto Prisma. Yeah? So now we see this, once this solution is there, and all the security components, the firewall as a service, CASB, right, to control my SaaS services security, right? So once these components are there in one place, it becomes much easier for us to deploy new services to our users wherever they are. They could be our own staff, employees, partner, and they could be anywhere, right? So with this solution, we have started our journey. Few services we are connecting. As we go along, we are building we are joining another capability of network capability, which means we should be in a position to, in a matter of hours, link up any connected to any location through what we call a global megaport connectivity network, right? So any data center where we are hosting a service, if you want to, a service is hosted there, I want that service to be accessible by another user who is already connected to our set. How do I bring it to them the same framework of security and connectivity?
Thanks, Jaiveer.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. It sounds like deployment is rather complicated in some ways. So for our audience out here who are new to SASE itself, I'm not sure, David, like Zero Trust, it has different levels of maturity from just adopting the principles to actual deployment of ZTNA and so forth. So for SASE, is there a maturity framework out there that we can refer to? If we are taking baby steps now, before we fly, we try to at least get some of the basic stuff in place first before we go for the more advanced level.
Yeah, sure. So from the SASE specific point, and I'll table the Zero Trust conversation for another time, but from a SASE maturity perspective, there's no framework per se. I think every vendor has released their sort of best practices approach. Me personally, not only do I represent Netskope here today, but prior to being with Netskope, I've been with Netskope for 2 years. Prior to being an employee of Netskope, I was a customer of Netskope. And I've been through that journey building a cloud security, secure access service, edge service for a large financial institution. I think the key thing for me, the elements I would think about in terms of the phases is, number one, start with visibility. What you'll find as you migrate towards a SASE service, regardless of the vendor, is it's going to give you a lot more visibility of how your organisation actually operates. Once you start steering that traffic through a central inspection and policy enforcement point, before you even start applying policy, just steering all that traffic through that central inspection point gives you a massive amount of visibility. You'll start to identify patterns, data usage, user patterns that you would not have had expected. And when you talk to line management and business units and you start showing them the data, you can start to really have a data-driven discussion now around how users are manipulating data, how they're sharing data, and when that data is going into cloud services. And what line management or business units thought was actually happening, you'll find that they'll go, well, hang on, I didn't think that was the case. Let me go and dig into that. So actually the security function itself can now become this almost like this business intelligence function for the organisation, and you can start to help the organisation truly understand their operations and the data flows and the business processes of the organisation. So I think that's really, really powerful. So for me, step number one is start with visibility. Step number two is then, once you've got that visibility and you can start having these data-driven discussions and you have some data to make some informed decisions, you can start to identify highest areas of risk. And then you can start to, take action on those highest areas of risk. You can create policies, and you don't have to change the way that you've implemented security policy previously. This is a new paradigm. This is, it's a different way to how security policy gets applied to the previous legacy tools that we've had. So then you can start to think about those data points I spoke about. Data, when I say data, actually understanding the classification or the sensitivity and criticality of that data, not just seeing volumes of data go up to a cloud service. That means nothing. If that's publicly classified data, if it's not sensitive data, I don't care about that. But if you have the ability to truly identify sensitive data, that's very powerful. If you have the ability to identify application risk, you can now overlay that into that session, into that data flow. You understand the identities, the user behaviours. You can really start to drive this picture of risk across your organisation, and then you can start to make some really informed decisions on policies that you want to apply. So for me, start with visibility. Number two, start with driving down maximum, start with addressing the highest areas of risk, and then number three, that's when I would start to think about more of a zero trust approach. Then you can start talking about, okay, how do I do that continual adaptive access? How do I start enforcing principles of least privilege? How do I start to assume breach? For me, they're the natural phases I would go through, and I've been through that myself.
Thanks, David. So visibility is key to a data-driven, risk-based approach in your security controls. So coming back to you, Jaiveer, in your experience, what are three architectural pitfalls that folks out there who are trying to implement SASE should avoid?
So I think I will just touch upon maybe the one point first, which is around integration and convergence, right? So as we said, SASE is all about network and security convergence, right? So we had number of independent, isolated solution to achieve this outcome. Now with this solution, which when you say if you try to achieve, say, integration and convergence, right, there are two different things. What you're trying to achieve is a seamless, one single convergent view, not integrate. Integrate still have a different view. So single pane of view, if you really want to know security, then SASE is the way to go, all right? So this is one consideration when you're evaluating things. You have to look at those parameters. Other thing is, SASE journey will be, I would say, unique for each organization, depending on where you are, in your current state. So chances are every organization will have certain number of tools and different maturity level, right? So now which particular features or services you would like to go first, as it's an architectural thing, the number of things which are offered there. So whether you want to activate the proxy there, the VPN thing, the DLP policies there, what are your sequence of things? And then accordingly you decide your own POC parameters, right? So that essentially it becomes I would say, a custom evaluation, right? Maybe David would like to add a few more things to your experience. You might have seen other clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of architectural things I would think about. One, recognise what we're talking about. We're talking about now the traditional on-prem network going away, and now we're leveraging the internet to drive our, being the underlying fabric of our technology. And I'm sure we've all heard, in the previous world about security being the blocker or slowing things down. I think it's really important now that SASE as a capability needs to be seen as something that gives you higher performance and better user experience, right? So make sure that you think about that end user experience, because particularly when we're talking about cloud services, think about if you don't move towards that SASE world, what would you do? You would have a user sitting in a country somewhere, they want to access a SaaS service somewhere else that's hosted in another part of the world. You're going to VPN them back to your corporate head office, then transfer that transaction into where they need to go. Well, hang on, now you're hairpinning them back, so you're going to have this performance impact. But by doing that, you're now actually impacting the benefits of the cloud. Some of the benefits of the cloud is better response time, better user experience. The moment you hairpin that, you kill that. So I think one of the things I would think about is how do you embrace the cloud and apply those controls to ensure a much better user performance. No longer should security be a reason for impacting user performance. I would also think about cost reduction. We're talking about a platform approach here. Every CISO and in every role I've had, I've always spoken to my team about achieving three things. One, reduce risk and improve security posture. Two, take cost out of my operations. And three, improve that user experience. You should be able to achieve all three with SASE. So keep that as those three North Star goals that you're trying to achieve. On the cost out piece, it's about consolidation, platform consolidation. From a Netskope perspective, the way we think about it is we have this platform with a bunch of microservices and APIs, completely cloud native, and we just turn on control features as we need them. But what that means with the single pass architecture, you have one single inspection point, one policy enforcement point, and that policy is applied uniformly across all those different channels, across all those different data flows. So no longer are security teams trying to figure out how they apply multiple security policies across disparate tools and end up with an inconsistent security posture. So I think that's sort of a couple of things I would be thinking about: the cost out, the user experience, and ensuring that you've got a unified and uniform, consistently applied risk profile across your organisation's digital services.
Yeah. Thanks, David and Jaiveer, for sharing. Fully agree with you, David. Ultimately, security has to be not just a business enabler; it's a business differentiator as well,
yes.
Right? So we have to be outcome driven. SASE is a means to an end, and it's really like what you have shared. Yeah, cost savings, the ability to enhance the user experience and so forth. A unified panel, like what Jaiveer has shared, single pane of glass. And a key point that you have highlighted as well, there could be potential nuances with different organizations. So the maturity that they strive for, what they want to implement first, is very much driven by the outcomes that they want to prioritize. Right? Thank you. That was great. So again, staying with you, Jaiveer, how has the shared responsibility model, we always talk about whether it's SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, different levels and tiering for shared responsibility models between the vendors and end users, the consumers. So how has the shared responsibility model worked out between you and vendors themselves, cloud service providers?
Sure. So I think
SASE vendors as well.
Yeah,
SASE vendors in this perspective, sorry to interrupt.
Sure. So I think everybody is definitely familiar with those shared accountability model in the context of cloud. Now, when we apply the same thing to SASE, right, which many of the providers are providing as a SaaS service, so definitely there is kind of things which the vendor is taking care, and there's kind of control to operate in that environment they're giving to you, right? So what, say, policies, data, user control, access control, you are defining for your own team inside that environment. No, you have to take responsibility for all of these things. As most of us already know, many of the security incident, the insider problem is much bigger than the outsider one. Yes, outsider one is there as well, right? So the accountability we have to take the portion where we are giving control to various team members and staff for different roles and functions, right? So we have to make sure what we call 4i checks in normal terms, or with the maker checker thing, and the role conflict of the roles, the entire mechanism has to be defined that way. And in terms of the service provider vendor, I think one key aspect which has to work pretty well, and we are aiming for that, the things are working in the direction which is what we call collaboration, right? Because they are expert on that platform. We want visibility and transparency. We are not hiding away from our responsibility, but we are not expert in that thing, right? So we want to operate at that level and see that there is a common transparency framework where we can see things, joint discussion, and then figure it out a joint action plan.
Can I just add, I think on the shared responsibility model, the organisation can never offset the risk. You never outsource the risk. You still own the risk as an organisation. You therefore are accountable as the organisation. You might have different parties that play different roles in the administration, support and operations of the system, and consequently the incident response and management of an incident or a breach. I think it's very important that as organisations go down this path, for every cloud service that they take on, not just at the highest level in a framework, but for every service, that it's clearly understood roles and responsibilities, handoffs between vendors, partners, and the internal organisation, making sure that you have complete visibility, logging, forensic capability, and think about how you update your incident response procedures in this new world, because that will change.
Yeah, excellent points, I think, especially now so because of the recent spate of supply chain attacks, whether it's SolarWinds, Kaseya, and so forth. And increasingly, there's regulations on the supply chain. Singapore, other countries, in the States as well, the President's executive order, and the ability to respond timely to incidents is what you have shared. In fact, some of the organizations I know of have started to impose breach notification timelines as well as vulnerability disclosure timelines on their vendors, right? Because that will help them make a well-informed decision how fast they can sort of draw a breach, if there's a need to do so, between themselves and the vendors, and be able to react to the incident or the vulnerabilities based on that situational awareness, right? Okay. We still have time for a couple of questions. Does anyone over here have questions? You would like to put up your hand and the mic will be passed to you. Thoughts, comments you would like to share about what has been shared, burning questions that you have with regards to SASE deployments?
How many people are actually looking at SASE as a new architectural approach for how you're underpinning and supporting your digital transformation? Are there many people in the room doing that today? One. Yep.
Yeah, after hearing what the panelists have shared on SASE itself, for those of you who are not on SASE, would you consider now deploying SASE in your environment for your cloud deployments to protect your APIs and so forth, right? I think these are very important areas to look at, because like what David has shared, is really becoming borderless. It's no longer contained with the corporate parameters, with COVID, with cloud adoption, with a cloud-first strategy. The cloud becomes part of your assets, right? Yes, we have one question. Thank you. Can we pass the gentleman the mic?
Okay, for us, right, our infrastructure delivery and automation is actually classified into three primary types. So one is cloud enabled, the other is container enabled, or let's say we call it cloud native. The third one would be the on-premise or the VMware based. So now the nature of network is actually changing, because in the public cloud, you would rather customize according to their offering and whatever architecture they are offering, and then we customize it. In the on-premise, it was what it used to be. That's what we have been using. And then in the container-enabled world, because it runs on the software-enabled network. So the paradigm of network infrastructure, as well as automation, as well as network security is changing. So how does SASE actually accommodate that paradigm shift of software delivery and automation that is occurring? Because everybody, I think all the organizations really want at least their microservices to be cloud native. They want to deploy it in the containers, and almost everybody want to put it on Kubernetes. So how does it really go into that paradigm?
I think it depends on what you mean by automation as to what you're trying to automate in that space. If you talk about the network itself, and because really this is what we're talking about when we're talking about SASE, right? This is a convergence of the old security world and the network world coming together. So there's a piece, actually, if there's a point I can leave anybody around this table with a point to take away, there will be a change in the operating model between your network security team, or between your network teams and your security teams to the way they operate today. And you need to be prepared for that. That's an operating model and a cultural change across the organisation you need to think about. But coming back to your point, I think there's a piece around that software-defined networking. Really, this is what we're trying to get to, right? We're trying to do this in a cloud-native, cloud-first, hyper-connected world. In terms of automation, the way I'll answer that, because I think you can talk about automation at all different levels, but from a network security perspective or network enablement, network path perspective, you're leveraging a security cloud which has resiliency and all those sorts of high availability elements built in, so that there is a native, so that there is a transparent, seamless cut over in terms of any failure or anything like that. I think in terms of the data points, this is where the automation piece comes really interesting. The number of data points you can get to. So from a Netskope perspective, we look all the way, we can inspect all the way to the JSON and the API. So we can see that entire data stream. So we're not making decisions just based on higher level protocols, we're making decisions based on specific attributes within the JSON. And within an ecosystem, we have a cloud threat exchange, which allows us to, gives us a highly integrated environment for you to start to then automate activity based off a multitude of signals that you would never have had, you probably never had access to or visibility to before. So it actually gives you a lot of data and insights on how you can start to transform your network security posture and your overall data security posture as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Great.
Jaiveer, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, in fact, that was a great question. I fully agree with David. Over and on top of that, if you have SIEM for the cloud, I mean, you can level up into SOAR, right? Security orchestration and automated response to automate some of the ways you deploy your indicators of compromise and TTPs to be able to react to attacks. Unfortunately, we are running short of time. Just a quick, maybe 30 seconds from each of you. One key takeaway for the audience before we conclude this panel. Perhaps we start with Jaiveer yourself first.
Yes, so I think while network and security is getting converged into SASE offering, but I would say the challenge of keeping yourself updated, that remains there. The threats are developing, evolving every single day. Right? So I think the organization must work out an internal initiative mechanism through which they can keep their people and processes aligned to the latest development in this domain. Yeah.
David?
Probably I just emphasise the point I just made is around the change in the operating model, and it's a responsibility operating model change as well as a culture change. It's just not a technology change.
Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause for our esteemed panelists, and I hope you guys have takeaways, whether you are here or virtually joining us, that you have some useful tips that keep your thoughts running in terms of deploying SASE in your environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our moderator, Stephen Sim, President of ISACA Singapore Chapter. Once again, a big thank you to our panel members, David Fairman, CSO Netskope, and Jaiveer Singh, Manager Enterprise IT Infrastructure and ITSM Platform for Singlife. Thank you to our three gentlemen.